You'll want to go check out what's happening at the Oldest Profession podcast. They just started releasing new episodes and are doing really cool stuff. Kaytlin Bailey has teamed up with historian Dr. Charlene Fletcher and a whole team at Old Pro Productions to make a 3-part series every month. And then as a bonus, once a month, Dr. Fletcher hosts a panel. I already binged on the first 3 episodes about Victoria Woodhull, and I can't wait to see what they do with Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Check them out. Also, they have cute merch, like really cute stuff. Welcome to the Peepshow Podcast.
News and stories from the sex industry.
With Jessie and PJ Sage. Welcome to the 71st episode of the Peepshow Podcast. This week we have Kaytlin Bailey from the Oldest Profession podcast on to talk about their relaunch. We also discuss sex work politics, old pros, sex magic, coming out, and family. Also on this episode, PJ and I reflect on the election results.
Hey, I'm Adrian, one of the hosts of After Adult Podcast. My porn name should be Mozart Fremont, but you probably know me better by my actual porn name, Siri.
I'm Rachel, but my porn name would be Woody 16th Avenue.
After Adult is a podcast about life and porn.
I don't actually watch porn.
I don't really watch that much porn either. I probably watch more than you, but I mean, most of the time it kind of would feel like going to work on my day off.
You 100% watch more than me, because I don't watch porn. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for After Adult.
Or visit afteradult.com and follow us on Instagram at afteradult.
Welcome back to the Peepshow Podcast.
Welcome.
I know, it's a little late. I missed the Halloween episode.
Make a monster noise.
I don't know.
Oh, nice monster.
Look,
that sounded like a crow.
I've had a long day. Crows are Halloween.
Okay, that's true.
Yeah, I've had a long day. I'm pretty beat. So I don't know about my monster noises. I'll think about it. You know, when I used to LARP, I used to play an orc.
What's that?
Like, what is an orc?
Yeah.
Have you really not watched Lord of the Rings?
No.
Okay. Anyways.
Okay. All right. So when you used to LARP, you played an orc, which I don't know what that is, but what is that? So did they crow or
no.
Like, how's that related?
No, it's like you'd have to talk and be like, make me want smash.
Is that how you would talk when you did it?
Yeah, for days at a time while camping in the woods.
Are you serious? That like you would stay in character for like 3 days at a time?
Yes, 100% serious.
Okay.
And I miss it and I dream about it.
Do you really?
I do. It is the thing I dream about most. I'm not going to lie.
Really? More than me?
Well, I mean, I spend like every waking hour with you.
Okay, that's
all I have
true.
to do is like wake up and roll over.
And I'm there.
No,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird because like it is such an intense like fantasy experience to be like immersed in a fantasy for several days at a time that like I think it's kind of crossed some of the wires in my brain.
Huh.
That like I don't know why. Like dream life goes back to the LARPing world quite frequently.
Wow. I don't even think you ever told me about one of your LARPing dreams.
Well, I don't know. They're kind of like unremarkable. They mostly involve running around in the woods with bad costumes and foam swords. So
I did see you fight with a foam sword once.
yeah, I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So now that we've like sufficiently embarrassed PJ, let's get to our interview.
Yeah.
That's what I'm here for, right?
Yeah. No, now I don't even know what's going on. Oh, no.
No, you really brought me on to talk about Pokemon Go and
about
about leveling up my Bronzor.
Yeah,
the tiny cup.
It's
or
not that I
whatever it
brought
is.
you on to talk
The
about
little
that.
cup.
It's that you told me you would come on, but I had to wait for you to level up your Bronzor.
Yeah.
And then you said it was very expensive. And I don't actually know if you're talking about like real money or game money or like what you're talking about.
I'm not spending real money on leveling up the bronze.
Okay.
I'm spending candy.
Okay. I was like, man, do we need to budget for Pokemon Go? Like, what do you mean this is expensive?
I don't know. Last time I checked, we were just barely making it. So. I did get my notice today that they will not give me unemployment. I did not qualify for the special, COVID relief unemployment after jerking me around for 6 months.
Since May.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And saying,
and telling you that you qualified and telling you how much you qualified for.
So, unfortunately, I'm not rolling in Pokemon Go funny money.
Oh, okay.
Just,
all right.
Yeah, whatever. Otherwise, I would just be I'd just be throwing Benjamins at the.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, welcome to the Peepshow Podcast, where we have PJ, who hasn't been on in a while, but actually he's not here for the interview with Kaytlin Bailey, but I thought I would have him come on for the intro segment with me to talk a little bit about why our episode is late. And the reason that our episode is late is because last week was election week, and oh my God, what a roller coaster.
Yeah. Roller coaster is not the word I would use for it. It was more of a marathon of it was of I don't know. Yeah. It was an emotional endurance trial.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
I didn't sleep much for 3 days. I'm a real political junkie. I turned CNN on, but then I turned the volume off and I turned NPR on.
I know. He actually had us watch that, and it was so confusing because I was like, what is happening here? The sound doesn't match what we're looking at the TV. The whole family sat in the living room to watch the election results, but we were watching the boards on CNN and listening to totally different coverage.
Excuse me, you were not watching the boards. You were watching The Magic Wall.
Okay.
With John King, who, by the way,
was awake for a week.
I know. Literally, they did a story on it. He slept between Tuesday and Friday. He slept for I don't know, 10 hours total, or maybe it was Tuesday and Saturday.
I know. And the most amazing thing about watching that all go down, because eventually you turned off NPR and we could actually listen to the audio, is that he got feistier and feistier.
Hard-hitting news here at the Peepshow Podcast.
You could see it. You could see that he was becoming more annoyed as the process went along.
You brought me on here as though I had something profound to say, but I don't. I mean, what
you
I have
always have something to say about, elections and political things.
I think everybody else, I'm feeling, some sense of relief, but I'm also feeling tremendously burnout. And I also think we have to face the reality of both of these candidates being flawed.
Yeah.
And as much as it is a step back from the kind of plunge towards authoritarianism that we were taking.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I know exactly what you're saying, because Trump was terrifying in so many ways, and we really wanted to make sure that we didn't have to endure 4 more years of Trump. But the alternative isn't, a panacea to all of the problems that we have in this country. What you're saying is what a lot of people, particularly in the sex work community, feel, and a lot of people who, who have professions that are criminalized, is that bringing in Joe Biden, who has a history of being, tough on crime, and Kamala Harris, who is a cop who spent much of her career creating laws that are harmful to sex workers. It's also scary, and it's hard to be excited about that, even though there is a relief that we don't have Trump in the presidency anymore.
Yeah, right. I mean, obviously the last 4 years were really difficult for, many people we love and care about in many different communities. And so, yeah, certainly a relief. But I do think that, particularly relevant to this podcast. I mean, like you said, these are people who do both have like a past history of pandering to like tough on crime, kind of agendas or constituencies. Kamala Harris in particular ran hard on her support of prosecuting Backpage and shutting on Backpage, and really seems to buy into the rhetoric that completely conflates like all sex work with sex trafficking, which isn't to say that sex trafficking isn't a real problem to the degree that it actually exists, but these efforts to try to solve that problem through criminalization, I think are really problematic, and I think Harris is kind of exemplary of carceral feminism, right? Like, and this particular idea that like, we're going to use police power to like promote a feminist agenda. And I don't know. I mean, we'll have to see. It's also possible that like maybe people will reach, Biden or Harris or their aides. Maybe they'll sense that the political winds have shifted and embrace, some of the criminal justice reforms that are really being worked out, particularly in minority communities and communities of color, and maybe they'll hear other versions of feminism than like this sort of mainstream old school kind of white carceral leaning feminism.
I mean, Kamala Harris, when she was running for president, did say that she supported decriminalization. That was a little slippery exactly what she meant by that. And her history had led many sex workers to believe that she wasn't actually proposing that or wouldn't actually follow through on a decrim platform. But I think that the fact that the more hopeful part of me thinks that the fact that she even thought that that was something that she should say when she was campaigning makes me think that there may be some way that we like, because you're right. I think that like culturally, a lot of things have shifted, and would it be possible to change the minds of this presidency? I don't know. It would be nice.
Yeah. And I mean, on a raw political level, I mean, at the very least, we can say that, Biden and Harris were swept into the White House by the very communities that are most directly harmed by criminalization, hypercriminalization in general.
Right.
And have been most harmed by these tough on crime policies. So it's, possible that will have some influence. I think it depends on how we ultimately end up telling the story about this election.
Yeah.
But as it looks right now, it seems that the people of Philadelphia and Atlanta and Detroit really helped, carry them into the White House. And, we can hope that sends a message, right? We can hope that will help them, to hear. And we can hope, perhaps Kamala Harris as a woman of color will, be willing to hear other people of color who, have been particularly affected by these policies.
Sex workers and other marginalized communities have a right to feel a little suspicious or unsafe or unsure of what this is going to mean.
Yeah, completely. I don't want to diminish in any way any fear that people feel. I think it's really legitimate. I think both of these people have, problematic histories. I think we also have to acknowledge that there are rape allegations against Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And I think we have every right to fear what this presidency will mean, for the communities of people that we care about. I just also don't want to fearmonger. I just want to put out the possibility that things will ultimately influence the policy agenda of the incoming administration, things other than just these individuals' past histories.
Right.
And that, I still personally feel hopeful relative to what the alternative could be, at least. That doesn't mean that I'm, optimistic or I'm imagining some utopia unfolding over the next 4 years.
I mean, at the very least, they'll tell people to wear a fucking mask.
Yeah, they actually already have. I mean, Biden did a COVID summit over the weekend and came out today and, sort of very strongly endorsed, mask wearing. So I think that's right. But in the transition, this is a critical time. We're going to see who they appoint to a number of really influential cabinet positions and other political appointing positions. Hopefully we'll see that soon, assuming that, Trump eventually concedes and this doesn't go on forever. But we'll get a, sense here in the next couple months about like which direction the administration is leaning. Are they putting more reform-minded people? Are they putting more progressive people in?
Right.
Or are they, going the opposite and putting, frankly, more conservative people in, and more, people who are more statist and more oriented towards carceral solutions.
Yeah. See, you have a lot to say. You always have a lot to say. I knew you'd pull through. Okay, so we want to wrap this up and move on to our interview with Kaytlin Bailey. So thanks for your analysis, and thank you, all of you, for being patient while we sat for 4 days on the couch and watched the magic wall.
There you go. Good job. You did it.
I did it. Yeah. Okay. Over at troublefilms.com, they have a few new releases, including Tatami by Mistress Katie Kanako and her production crew in Tokyo, Japan. Tatami continues Trouble Films' 2020 trajectory of exploring queer kink, bondage, and power exchange. Go to troublefilms.com now to buy the film or stream over 100 queer porn videos and films with your troublefilms.com VIP membership. Only $20 for your first month. I'm here today with Kaytlin Bailey, who's the founder of Old Pro Productions and the host of the Old Pro Podcast. So welcome, Kaytlin. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you. I love your podcast, and I have learned so much just by listening to all of these stories of the old pros. It's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely one of our missions. We're here to entertain, and we are also here to educate. I think it's important that these stories sort of live on, in our minds and imaginations. For sure.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about what made you start that, and for people who aren't familiar with your podcast, like what the format is.
Sure. The Oldest Profession, we've been around since 2017. And we've gone through many iterations. I started the podcast as a stand-up comic with a girlfriend of mine and fellow old pro Wendy Starling. And we really, started as like a comedy first podcast where we were, telling each other these stories and sort of exploring the history of sex work. But it was comedy first, essentially. And then after the passage of Sesta Fosta, man, you can hear me get radicalized. Like on the podcast.
What's so funny is that's our story too. I mean, I am not a stand-up comic. I'm not even funny. But the part of the story that resonates with me is we started this podcast in 2017 and then didn't know that like the whole podcast was going to be taken over by Fosta Sesta. Not only that, but like our whole lives.
Yes. Yeah. Your whole life. So, Donald Trump getting elected was certainly like I think a political awakening for so many folks. And then the watching the harm, spread in my community with Sesta Fosta. And so the second season was much more political. And so like Wendy left the show and I started interviewing more advocates and like getting more involved in the sex work advocacy community. And then I took a break from the podcast. I stepped away for almost 2 years to focus on, I became the director of communications for decriminalized sex work. So we went, I think about 1.5 years without releasing any new episodes, but we are back with season 3 of the Oldest Profession podcast, we have brought on a PhD historian, Dr. Charlene Fletcher, who is amazing, who is putting together an annotated bibliography for every episode. We've broken down every Old Pro into a 3-episode series. So every month we're going to be featuring a different Old Pro from history. We're going to be doing a 3-episode series on them. And then Dr. Fletcher is going to be hosting the Old Pro panel on the 4th Wednesday of every month with invited guests and experts to sort of talk about the Old Pro of the month.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you have a history background too?
I do. Yeah, that was my that was my undergraduate degree. Was history from the College of Charleston, and I wrote my senior thesis on the economic structure of brothels in Charleston, South Carolina, between 1890 and 1920.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so you're totally primed to do this podcast.
Yeah, I feel like one of the few humanities majors in my life using my degree like very aggressively. Yeah, you didn't think you could build a life deconstructing primary sources, but if you build it, you can do whatever you want.
I hear you. I was a philosophy major and tried to get a job in that field. And then I was like, you know what? Forget it. I'm going to do my own thing.
Exactly.
And I'm doing, I feel like my work is more philosophical here in this arena than it
would be working at McKinsey or whatever else you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more, and I'm surrounded by more interesting people. So yeah.
Chosen family, chosen community.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. What does your first month look like?
Yeah, so the first month we featured Victoria Woodhull, who is the first woman to run for president, and is also an Old Pro. She ran in 1872, and it's been interesting to me as we've experienced the 100-year anniversary of the 19th Amendment, the suffrage movement. And, we had many strong female candidates in the Democratic primaries and Hillary Clinton's presidency, but we haven't heard a lot about Victoria Woodhull. She should be this big deal person in the feminist movement, in the suffrage movement, in the women running for office shit.
Right.
She's really been kind of erased from history, both by her contemporaries and also I would argue by our modern feminists because of her sexual reputation.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you thought that was because of her 100%. Radical sexual politics.
Explicitly. Yeah, she was exiled from the suffrage movement in her own time because of her free love position and her reputation. So she was absolutely suffragists were terrified of getting a bad reputation. They're like, we want the right to vote, but no one wants to come. That's a bridge too far.
I feel like things haven't changed that much. Liberal feminists are the same.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's definitely been a lot of this podcast is I know everyone is panicking, but good news and bad news. It's not that much different than it's been.
It really isn't.
Technology changes, people don't. Injustice is terrible.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine who is not a sex worker, but considers herself fairly progressive and social justice oriented. And a couple of months ago, we were having a conversation, and she said something like, "Well, I mean, but I would like to see sex work regulated and legalized. I mean, shouldn't there be blah 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 blah?" And I was like, "Who cares what you would like to see? You're not a sex worker, and you don't know anything about this movement. Your position shouldn't matter. It's not about you."
My one-liner about this, or I guess it's actually 3 lines, but my synopsis of this situation is conservatives have a fetish for just cracking down on sex stuff, and liberals have an instinct to try to help people that they can't be bothered to understand, causing
this is so true.
More harm than good. And so I run into this all the time, and this is why as an advocate and as an activist, I I really think it's important for the sex worker rights movement to center itself and position itself as within the LGBT umbrella rather than as a labor rights movement, because I feel like labor rights opens us up to like a world of regulatory dystopian nightmares. Whereas framing this as two consensual adults ought to be able to do grown-up stuff with each other, whether money is exchanged or not, right? Like when we stopped criminalizing homosexuality, we didn't make people fill out forms to like do butt stuff with their buddy. We just stopped the arrests, you know, and I feel like that's where we need to center sex work, or, you know, like I think it's very naive to think that a regulatory structure can exist outside of the horphobic soup we all live in.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And also those communities are already so heavily overlapped.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And always have been. In fact, that takes us to next month. We're doing a 3-part series on Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, right? Mothers of so many movements.
Right. Yeah.
And really talk about the intersections of those movements, the history of that, and also, you know, the sort of similar respectability politics within the gay rights movement that was very similar to the respectability politics of the suffrage movement, that was very interested in policing the kind of advocates that were centered and elevated. And so like the gay rights movement in the 1970s was very explicit about wanting to exile trans people from the movement in order to you know, be more palpable to mainstream voters.
I think that's all really interesting. I want to go back to this idea of sex worker rights being framed up in labor rights movements, because I think about this a lot and I'm curious what your thoughts are. It seems to me like the push to do this, I understand where it's coming from, and so many people are pushing like sex work is work, and while it is work, I think
it is
to
also
me
sex.
It's also sex, and I always step back and I'm like, okay, it's a job, but it's not a job like another job. And I think that
it's like you don't want to give things to the antis, but it's like, look, what we're doing here is closer to spiritualism and healing than it is to like nail salon. You know, but it's I don't know, it's a and that's the thing, it's like sex work is it's just so big, right? Like there are all kinds of sex work, all kinds of sex workers, all kinds of like labor unions make sense to me in strip clubs, massage parlors, like brick and mortar job jobs that you show up to like do sexy work. Worker protections make sense to me when organizing against platforms, right? Like OnlyFans or Pornhub, or like all of that stuff makes sense to me. But if it's illegal for a grown-ass person to go out into the world and have another conversation with another grown-ass person where at the end of that, someone gives them money and someone else does a sex act, if that is illegal, if anyone has to fill out paperwork or like become licensed or submit themselves to a mandatory test or become registered in order to do that, that is going to welcome a level of policing and surveillance into the day-to-day of every single person in this country that I think nobody really quite fully comprehends that. And that is another, not tension, but pattern that we see in the Oldest Profession podcast, is like how the criminalization and demonization of sex work opens the door to misogynistic policies that prevent women and gay people and trans people and nonconformists from like occupying public space. Like a lot of that has its origins or public facing justification all wrapped up in whorephobia. And I think we're seeing that now with Nesta Fosta and the Earn It Act and like all of these policies that say that they're doing one thing when in fact that it's an existential threat to all of our freedom of expression on the internet.
Yeah, and I think that, framing it just as labor like flattens the complexity of what sex work is in ways that you just, I think, articulated. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I understand that impulse, and it's not as if I think it's bad, but it seems I mean, I do think it's bad to regulate sex work, but I think that it also just narrows and flattens what we do to a job. And
Right.
I'm hard pressed to think of sex work as like just a job, in the sense that like
Right.
it's a very different kind of work. It's a different
Yeah.
way of relating to the world, actually.
I do think it is an interesting, it's like it ties to witchcraft, you know,
Mhm.
ties to the arts, right? Ties to queer communities, ties
Right.
to artist communities. And, you know, I feel like the same way that like artists would, you know, chafe at kind of a tone deaf regulation for their own protection or like whatever it is that they're trying to do of like,
Yeah.
that's not,
Mhm.
you don't understand this energy, man, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And like we said earlier about the fact that there is so much overlap between the LGBTQ community and
Mhm.
sex workers. That's true of art too. Like,
100%, 100%.
sex work communities are full of artists and full of queer folks, and
And activists, actually, you know,
yeah.
like sex
Mhm.
work and public, you know, the occupation of public space by women, you know, public woman was synonymous with prostitution for a long time because
Mhm.
only sex workers were able to occupy public space without, you know, because they didn't have a chastity to protect. So they were able to move freely. Like in, you know, in 16th century Venice, courtesans were allowed to enter the public library, but the wives and highborn daughters of Venetian citizens were not.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's like women who have uh, a freedom that most women don't have as
Yeah,
these
and
like public figures. Yeah.
I think that, you know, and that goes back to, you know, myths as old as Lilith, right? Is that like the existential threat of sex workers is the existential threat of, you know, a feminine person who is like just a little bit too comfortable leaving dudes that are no longer serving their needs, you know? And
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's and yeah, as I say many times, one of my favorite one-liners is like, you can't have a patriarchy if you don't know who the dads are.
You know, as a public figure who gets a ton of like media requests for all kinds of interviews, I was thinking recently last week that sometimes I'm so surprised at what journalists are surprised about when they ask me, particularly about like sexuality. And I'm like, I thought people knew this. And then I'm like, you know, sex workers actually carry like a totally different knowledge set, because they have
Mhm.
access to things that wives and
That civilians really
girlfriends
don't.
don't
Yeah.
have access to. And
And
I forget that. And
and part of that is, you know, not to be super gendered, but like sisterhood in the loosest sense, you know?
Mhm.
And so like one of the this is one of the things that I found when I was doing my senior thesis is that, you know, domestic workers and sex workers both experienced pregnancy outside of marriage at like comparable rates, right?
Mhm.
Because domestic workers were often sexually abused or you know, like forced into sexual circumstances by their employers, but they were completely disconnected from information about birth control, access to the criminal underground networks that they would need to procure you know, condoms or
Mhm.
contraception or that knowledge, whereas sex workers who were working in brothels were able to share information with each other. So,
Yeah.
like a domestic
Mhm.
laborer who found themselves facing an unwanted pregnancy and a sex worker facing the same situation, the sex worker has way more resources available to
Yeah.
them
Mhm. Right.
to help with that situation. Um,
Right, and resources within the communities that they've
yes,
created themselves.
mutual aid, which I think has become like
Yeah.
a really big theme with COVID, is like watching, like sex workers are members of a criminalized class, you know,
Mhm.
like LGBT people before 1969, you know, immigrants, undocumented immigrants today,
Yeah.
you know, and
Mhm.
so those communities are both at a disadvantage because we are disconnected from mainstream support systems, and also have a little bit of an advantage because we don't expect the system to take care of us. So we have many generations of knowledge of taking
Mm-hmm.
care of each other.
Yeah.
And that I think is something that we see in lots of subcultures, but I'm really impressed with the way that manifests in the sex work community.
Absolutely. And I think, I've told people outside of the sex work community that when PJ got cancer and both of us couldn't, he was sick for almost a year and I was taking care of him and in and out of the hospital for that long as well. And we were trying, we also stepped away from our podcast because he was sick.
Yeah, of course.
And yeah, and it was amazing how much support we got from the sex work community. I mean,
Yeah.
they raised lots of money to to help us and to make it so that I could take him to the hospital and not work. And
Mm-hmm.
that sort of stuff is amazing. And I don't think that there are other communities obviously that support each other, but when I tell civilian friends that, they are like, "Wait, what? They just raised a bunch of money for you?" And I was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah. Yeah, they did."
Yeah. It's like, and
And
like,
not only
yeah.
that, but like I had, cuz we have kids, 3 different sex workers stayed at our house for a week at a time. They took 3 weeks out of their life and watched our kids so I
Yeah.
could take care of him, and it was the sex workers who showed up and lived with us for almost
Yeah.
a month.
And I think that is, that sort of goes back to, I feel like the more I get into this, the more I sound like just like a, I'm this close to starting like a fertility cult. Like, I swear to God. But like going back to the temples of Ishtar and a society that worshipped priestess prostitutes and recognized the power of the life life cycle and goddesses and the value of like the fertility and sex energy, was
Yeah.
much more equipped at like raising children in a mutually supportive way, of like having communities that are interconnected. I think is better off than this nuclear family bullshit,
Oh,
which has proven to be
yeah.
like literally the most dangerous place for women and children, is like isolated alone in a house with a man who thinks he's in charge. That is like just
Yeah.
the worst way to organize family.
Yeah, I can say that from
Yeah.
growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, whereas, like, my kids are very funny because, like, when that was going on and, our friends came and stayed with us, it was very funny, like, my teenager was like, "Oh, she's like so and so," and I was like, "Yeah," and they're like, "And she works at the strip club down the street from my school," and I was like, "Yep, she does,"
Yep.
and they're like, "Okay, cool." Now I fit the pieces together, and I was like, "Yeah." And that's so, like,
Yeah.
normalized for them that there's just a lot of women in their lives that, work in the sex industry, have, these flexible lives in which they can care for
Sex
each
workers make
other's
the best
kids.
childcare backups in the world, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, like
yeah,
I'd rather have a sex worker as my backup babysitter than like a nurse,
yeah.
where it's just like yeah, you have the skills, but like you're gone like all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny because I was talking to a good friend of mine, Reese Piper, who was one of the ones who came and stayed with us. And we were talking about the fact that it's interesting to think about like sex work as like anti-work too, because
Hmm.
she could take a week off and hang
Hmm.
out and help me with my
And
family. And
yeah, help provide all of that. I hate to call it invisible labor because it's not actually, but like, yeah, I feel like sex workers are able to organize their lives around community care and mutual aid in a way
right.
that so
Mm-hmm.
many other professions really disconnect us from our
Right.
communities.
Mm-hmm.
And people I think sort of like come to after like 30 or 40 years of employment, looking around and realize like the only person that they know is like their spouse, like, and that
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think that is really a detrimental to the human
Yeah.
spirit and human condition. We are meant to be connected to each other. And I feel like sex workers both provide that service to communities
Mm-hmm.
by being a source of connection for people that are disconnected, and also live lives of connection because they have more flexible schedules and they
Right.
engage with it.
Yeah.
And this is something we're delving into. The December Old Pro, we're doing a deep dive into Lilith, the Lilith myth,
Mm-hmm.
and the dark feminine. And this is something that we talk about, that like I think sex workers in our society are people who have faced and grappled and dealt with their shadow selves more so,
Mm-hmm.
I think, than civilians. And I think that
Yeah.
that is very valuable work.
Yeah. Yeah, all of that is so interesting and so powerful to me. And I mean, I think that as sex workers too, we can see the flip side of this too, because we do live in these communities and we do live lives of a lot of connection. And then our clients, or at least like, I mean, from my experience, I can't talk about everybody's clients, but are exactly what you described. Like, are most of them are living in nuclear families. Most of
Hmm.
them feel cut off from connections with other people because of heteronormative
Yeah,
like
right,
expectations of only talking to your spouse
right.
lest you I don't know, unless so that the world doesn't come crashing down. And it
Yeah,
creates like a lot of lonely isolation.
yeah, I think that's really true. And I feel like sex worker, like we experience that in a couple of different ways, right? Like many of us are living double lives, right? Like not everyone, I know,
Mhm.
I'm out for reasons, and I have this personality, and so I live in a state of sort of constant coming out. But I know that a lot of sex workers keep their identities hidden from
Mhm.
their family of origin, and many people are working in isolated ways,
Mhm.
and are disconnected from community. And also
Right.
the clients that we interface with are dealing with their own levels of disconnection. And I feel like so much of the pathology of patriarchy, right, is this stripping from cis men their own emotional coping mechanisms and connection to their own feelings, and then sort of
Mhm.
burdening women with like emotions for two or three,
Yeah.
or like, and I feel like
Yeah.
sex workers go into those sessions, I think, with like where that is more explicit and like can be kind of acknowledged and dealt with, whereas I feel like in just regular go along to get along heteronormative relationships,
Mhm.
non-sex working women are just like burdening all of this extra emotional shit without any of the tools of sex work to like protect themselves or boundaries or like anything that they might
Yeah.
need to sustain that.
Yeah, I was talking to one of my queer friends who's not a sex worker, but I think that, queer communities also circle around, and protect their people and
Yep.
create similar sorts of networks. And she was saying, and it was really funny, she was like, "Man, I'm at work and I can't believe how much women hate their husbands." Like, she's like, "I don't understand. What are they doing? Why?" She's like, "I
Being,
don't hate
yeah.
my spouse." And I was like, "I don't hate my spouse either. I actually like my spouse. So I don't know. I don't know why all these women hate their husbands." But but there is like I think that those social frameworks are hostile.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I think that there is a hostility, I think, just sort of within the marriage framework. I mean, like I married a man. And
Mhm.
we had our 1 year anniversary a couple of days ago, and like
Oh, nice.
I love him, and also we don't have kids yet. And so
Mhm.
it's like it's one of those things where the source of most tension, we don't we've only been at this for like 367 days. So like, I feel like I can't speak to the entrenchment of, what is,
Marriage.
but right, of marriage, but like we really are partners, and like Trey does a ton of the like quote unquote women's work, as does my father, so I feel like
Mhm.
I wasn't really raised in a household that modeled like that kind of separation, but yeah, I could see how it would be. There's a joke from I'm gonna kick myself for not remembering her name. She's one of my favorite stand-ups from like the 80s. But she's got this great line of like, I can't wait to get married and find that one special person to annoy for the rest of my life. But yeah, I mean, it's the isolation, I think, that is so burdensome on couples, and I think that really comes to a head with kids.
And the idea that we're supposed to somehow, that this one person is supposed to meet every single one of our needs, like our emotional needs, our social needs, our financial needs.
And with quarantine, just the lie of that has been like Trey and I have now been forced. Like we both, Trey and I married busy people. We both married busy people, and so like we were married, but we were spending like, I don't know, 4 waking hours a day together, like not crazy. And now with quarantine, absolutely. No, Trey needs friends to talk about gear with. I cannot be that person to him. And I need people to talk about art with, and he cannot be that person for me. Like it just cannot.
But I think that's I think that it's important to, I don't know. I have a different story, which is that I have always been married.
What?
Yeah, I got married when I was 20, and
wow.
I was married for 16 years, and then I got divorced, and I said I was never ever getting married again,
and then like 6 months later.
Yeah. And then I met PJ, and like we just totally connected on like every level, and I would lie in bed with him and read like feminist text to him about why marriage is a bad deal for women. And then and he was like, I get it, I get where you're coming from. And then he was like, will you marry me? And I was like, yeah, okay.
That's so great.
Now is a good time to hit the pause button and head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/Peepshow Podcast. Even $1 a month shows us that you care and want to see Peep Show continue to thrive. Also, you can help increase our reach with a review on iTunes.
That's like my dad. My dad got married at 17 to a woman, and he was married for 17 years and then got divorced, and then 6 months later married my mom. And so he's never been
Did they
an
have
adult
kids before?
Without no children in the first marriage. That made it. So yeah, that is really, really interesting to me. That like, also when you said that you were married at 20, I just couldn't help but think of that Reba song, right? Like, is there life out there, right? She married when she was 20. She thought she was ready.
I wasn't even allowed to drink at my wedding.
That's bananas.
I mean, I did, but like legally, I wasn't even old enough to drink, and I got married. No, I was gonna say it's weird because I had 2 kids in my first marriage, and the oldest one is 18 now, and I'm like, oh my God, we were dating when we were younger than this kid.
Yeah.
Why? What happened?
Yeah.
Because I'm like,
nuts,
these are kids.
Right?
Yeah, and then the
these
younger
are children.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about soldiers now. Where it's like I see military parades and I'm like, these are boys. Like little boys.
I know if my oldest son came to me and was like, I'm getting married, I would be like, are you out of your fucking mind?
Right.
Okay, fine. Did that.
If you can do your taxes for 2 years in a row, then you can get married. There. Oh, that's the deal. Sure. You're ready to be an adult as soon as you can do your own taxes. You fucking idiot. That's funny.
Anyways.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's funny that you said that, where they lie in bed reading feminist lit, because like Trey and I were engaged for like a year and a half, you know, and and he's an Eagle Scout, and you know, like
oh, that's cute.
yeah, right, yeah, and
I married an old pro, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Well, I told my dad, I was like, you know, I'm marrying an Eagle Scout because it's like all the skills of a soldier, but without the PTSD. So,
yeah,
you know, just trying to, and we've known each other since high school. We've known each other for a long time.
Oh, wow.
And still, I was like, couldn't get over not who my husband is, but like what he represents, of just this like smart cis white dude that like was smart and got good opportunities and like developed into like the picture perfect citizen person, right? Like my parents think of him as like rescuing me from like a life of degeneracy or whatever. It's like I was like a feral person before I met him, and like now I have this collar and my shots and I don't want to be outside anymore. But like, and so and that's, you know, but I struggle with that because it's not true, but it looks true, it feels true, and it's like the social assumptions from both of our parents and our extended family and like not my friends, but like some of our peer network. It's just, I don't know, it feels like a fight. And so Trey and I have definitely had a lot of late night moments where I'm just like reading passages of like the Book of Lilith to him, and I go out and I have my moon exercise, right? My moon dances, and like, you know, Trey's like just sorry, and I want to tell this one other story.
Yeah, please.
So when we decided to get married, it wasn't like a surprise question because my husband's not a sociopath. So like, we had talked about it before. Right. If anyone is facing a surprise proposal, say no. That's not how proposals actually work in real life. That's just the movie.
That's so bizarre to me that idea gets pumped. Like, who wants to be surprised with like, especially those like
lifelong contracts,
especially those big public, like everybody's like, oh, that's so romantic, God. And I'm like, that's not romantic. That's
insane. That's pressure. You're being gaslit by a stadium of people that don't know shit about you. But yeah,
right.
So Trey and I have been talking about getting married, and you know, we've gotten so far as I was like, you know, I wanted to use my Aunt Joni's, my late Aunt Joni's ring. You know, didn't want to buy a new one or whatever that. So we were doing that. So my then boyfriend went home to ask my father's like blessing, because like, you know, I came out as a sex worker, and Dad's really, I was like, we'll throw this old man a bone, right? Like, you know, I'll love this. I'll appreciate this gesture. But because of the undiagnosed, unacknowledged, untreated PTSD, my dad like went to a really dark place really fast. Like,
oh no.
Yeah. And started like, you know, explaining my husband, like, not only that he'd be willing to kill him, but like that he has a lot of experience with that, and like sort of revisiting dark things. And then in kind of a moment of like drunken something, he turned to Trey and said, you know, she's going to do whatever she wants forever, right? Talking about me. Like as a warning or whatever to this poor Eagle Scout that I'd bamboozled somehow into like, and Trey's like, yeah, I know. And then my dad was like, well, in that case, great.
Have at it. So like, she's your problem now.
I tried to mind her. I couldn't figure it out.
That's so funny.
Yeah. You know, she's going to do whatever she wants forever, right? It translates. Yeah.
Man, my dad's like totally checked out of my life, and he met PJ after we were married and after our son was born for like a dinner. He like happened to come through town, and so I'm just like, he didn't even come to our wedding, so I'm just over him.
Yeah, no, I get that. And it's like, I think chosen family is really important. I think community connection is really important, but I think biology is not destiny. Like,
no,
we are not necessarily born to the people that we're supposed to spend the most time with. That's not
right. Yeah. I mean, our friends came out, and my dad sent a text the day before our wedding and was like, "Yeah, I don't think I'm gonna make it." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Thanks, Dad. It's my wedding." I know it's my second one, but it's been 16 years. It's not like I do this every 6 months.
Right, yeah. What, did he have a card game reschedule? Like, what?
Well, I mean, I don't know. He just didn't come. But he didn't seem like he had an objection to it. He's just not in my life. And I was like,
it was just
no, it wasn't a protest. He didn't even know him. So yeah. He's like, I'm kind of busy. It's not a good time. Okay. Really all right.
My dad was so nervous leading up to my wedding. So he walked me down the aisle, and he knew he was supposed to do that. And, my mom had a nice navy suit made for him, and we'd gone over it. We did the rehearsal and all of that. And so, like, I'm in my wedding dress behind the divider or whatever, preventing me, like, so we could do the big reveal. And so it's like the first moment my dad and I are like actually alone, and he turns to me, and the first thing he said was, "Oh God, I'd rather be in a foxhole." And
oh my God.
Dad, what? Dad, wrong feeling state. I don't know. So then we did it, and I was like, "You nailed it, Dad. You didn't yell, you didn't shoot anyone. Fucking crushed it."
Are him and your mom still together?
Oh yeah. I don't know if they should be, but they are. They've basically figured it out. They've been married for 35 years. They don't get along so good, but they get things done together. They're cute.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Well, my mom can't hear other people when they talk, and my dad doesn't understand his own feelings. So they go together like peanut butter and jelly. My dad pretends to have no needs, and my mom cannot see any of his needs. And so that's perfect.
That's so funny, because that's very much like PJ's parents. His dad is like perpetually grumpy, but actually like great, like solid, but just like grumpy. And the thing that's nice about that is like, exactly how he feels. Like there's no, you don't have to wonder, I wonder how he feels about this, because and if you can just wade through the grumpiness, like it's fine. And his mom, is, I don't know, everything bounces off of her. She's just like so narrowly. She's so narrowly focused on her own agenda. And so his grumpiness just like bounces off of her.
Right. And that's great.
And they just plow ahead.
That's great. Oh man, I love that. That boomer can do, can't see attitude. I love that.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And we sit there and we watch it and we're like, wow, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's funny. Trey's parents are adorable. They're both hardcore Baptists. Trey comes from a long line of Baptist missionaries. Like his grandfather was a Baptist missionary. His sister is a Baptist missionary. Like it's a lot of Baptist missionaries. And so his mom is like super involved in the church, and they're like big in their church community. But what occurred to me, because I love spending time with them. Like we don't agree politically or see the world, like we're on opposite sides of the culture war, but they're like so cute and comfortable together. And it's like, oh, church is like AA meetings. It's like you just show up in a circle with your community and share and process. And so they basically had like 30 years of couples counseling through the church. And it's like, so they're like super comfortable with themselves. They are like self-actualized people. Whereas like my parents have just been hitting whack-a-mole on like dealing with their own shit. So yeah, I mean, however you get yours.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about what the other projects that you have coming down the pipeline. We've got so detoured by marriage and parents, but it's fun. It's fun to talk about.
No, it's good. It's important to talk about this stuff. Yeah, so I'm leaving my position at Decriminalize Sex Work. So I've been working as the communications director there for the past 2 years, but we just hired this amazing other comms director who's like a real communications director, not like I'm a professional clown, right? I was like, I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm good in front of a crowd, but like, I don't know how salsa works or like what to do with an email list. So I'm excited about that. But I started Old Pro Productions to tell better sex worker stories. And so our flagship project is the third season of the Oldest Profession podcast, where we've made a lot of hires and we've partnered with folks, and we're really taking it to the next level in terms of like a public history project and like a public education project. We've started an email list, so we have a monthly newsletter that comes out now, which I think is great. And we're building towards this event, January 25th, where we're funding an art build in 5 cities across the country to celebrate old pro history or sex worker history in 5 cities on the date of January 25th, which is the anniversary of the first sex worker-led protest in this country. And I'm currently developing my second one-woman show, Whore's Eye View, which I hope to like get on its feet and tour as soon as like live theater and gathering is like a thing that can happen again.
Wow, so you have a lot going on.
Yeah, and we have ambitions to make, full-length documentaries and educational shorts, but we want to build a production company that creates events and media and content that brings sex workers and allies together, and so that's what we're doing.
That's so cool. I love that.
Thanks. I'm really proud of it. We just started, so I'm definitely still, I'm sure you feel this as you also run a production company. Like, I feel like I'm still holding my breath. Like this might not work, like this might, right? Like this, we might just, but
absolutely. I said that to my therapist yesterday. Because I always have this idea that like the wheels are going to fall off everything, like any moment. And she's like, why? It seems to be working. And I'm like, I don't know, because it could not. And she's like, okay.
Sure, okay. But yeah.
But it seems to be. And I'm like, I don't know. I just don't know. But yeah, it's hard because it's hard.
Will.
It's hard to do something on your own. To start something new and to figure out how to create something. And not only how to create something, because it's one thing to be a creative, but to run a business that's like sustainable is another thing. And to merge those things together.
It's hard, and people don't do it for a reason. Like I really do believe that like those of us that are wired for creativity, I think like we were talking before we started recording, of just like this creative chaos energy mess of like and running a business are two different things, but I feel like good business managers don't really become entrepreneurs. Like crazy people become entrepreneurs. People that can't put themselves into other people's systems, right? Like that's what this is. It's like I looked around and was like, no, I just can't possibly work for anyone.
Like, I know. I was talking to my oldest son about that the other day. I was like, I don't even think that I could like have a job. I don't remember what that's like. And then I also said that to my therapist. I was like, I don't know. I'm like unemployed. She's like, you work all day, every day. And I was like,
all day, every day.
Yeah, I don't, I guess.
Yeah, it's like, is this a job or is this a hobby that got like way out of control? Like just way out of hand. And the line between that is thin and porous and nebulous and confusing. And if you think too hard about it, you'll stop. And so like, and
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I feel like there must be something wrong with my brain that I can't like wrap it around my career.
But syndrome is just part of being alive.
Yeah.
But like,
especially if they're it's not as if we have like a career trajectory and a ladder with markable goals. That
I'm used to that because I came from comedy, right? So like comedy is another sort of like wilderness trajectory, and entertainment generally. And I also think that like sex workers are better positioned at this entrepreneurial spirit and balancing the chaos energy with the bottom line, I think, than other folks. And like, so in that sense, I've been at this since I was 17, and so I think there's an entrepreneurialness in both sex work and entertainment that I think has sort of led naturally and given us both like quite a foundation. And also that like that X factor, that like stick a finger in your yoni and ask the universe kind of like trust is another thing that I think we have that gives us a proverbial leg up
Yeah.
in this crazy banana pants world.
And I mean, the good thing about our businesses is that running companies that tell sex worker stories are great because there's always sex workers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like some other industries that are just like crashing.
Yeah, eventually you're gonna run out of carpenters to interview. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's and that is interesting too, is like the way to frame things is like I like the framing of the oldest profession because it's a nice counterpoint to all of the moral panic around sex work. It's like
Yeah.
you can accept the basic premise that this is a thing that has always been, then it's
Yeah.
a little bit easier to have like a relaxed conversation about it.
Yeah, I think that every single time I see, and I'm sure you've seen this because it's been circulating on leftist Twitter for like the last 6 months, but the entire conversation about like after the revolution, there'll be no sex work. And I'm like, what? Like, how, why does anyone think that? It's not as if like our current capitalist system created sex workers.
Right. Yeah. No, sex work is older than money. It predates
Yeah.
us as a species, right? Like, penguins do this for rocks. Like you don't need, you don't need the evils of capitalism to. I mean,
No.
but counterpoint, right? People that think that they hate prostitution because they hate someone doing something bad for them for something as crass as money, right?
Mhm.
Those people don't actually hate sex work. They hate exploitation. And they
Right.
should join the resistance of capitalism generally and help to create a more economically just system where everyone is getting their needs met.
Oh,
But a
absolutely.
way to
Yeah.
not do that would be to like more aggressively police sex work. Like that's not how you're going to eradicate exploitation and violence.
Right. Yeah. It's just funny. I think that every single time I see that. I'm like, this is a misunderstanding of what why
Right.
sex work
Yeah.
exists.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And I think understanding moral panics, I mean, like not to plug another podcast on your podcast, but You're Wrong About does a really good treatment of the human trafficking panic and like does it, I think, an appropriate historical context of that, like the satanic panic, human trafficking, white slavery. I think there was a period of time where this country tried to outlaw dancing and pinball machines. Like we've just been through this a couple of times now of like
Yeah.
picking
Yeah.
aggressively the wrong enemy to crack down on.
Yeah. I would love to listen to that. I'll check that out.
Yeah, it's good. It's really, really good.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up? You want to
I
make
mean,
sure we get to?
I just really encourage, folks that enjoyed this conversation to check out The Oldest Profession, both the podcast and our website. We have a lot of really exciting events coming up. I'm really proud of our newsletter. It's a roundup of sex worker rights related news from around the world, in addition to different sex worker rights organizations and upcoming events through Old Pro Productions. So check it out, get involved.
Yeah. And actually, why don't we talk about the joint episode that we're going to do?
Yeah. So we have, December 17th is a really big holiday for sex workers. It is a day that we mourn and acknowledge those of us within our community that have died. And it's the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. And I feel like you and I share a philosophy here that one of the ways that sex workers can protect ourselselves and strengthen our community is by coming out to our community and by surrounding ourselves with people that know our story and do not judge us for our involvement in the sex industry. And so we are asking our listeners and people in our community to submit, uh, maximum 7 or 8 minutes, right? Short
Yeah.
stories
Yep.
about coming out to your community, whether it's a family member or a friend or like somebody who was cutting your hair, or like what it was to tell somebody in your civilian life that you have these magical powers, or however you experience
Yeah.
your what you do in sex work. And so we wanted to put that together as a kind of salve. You know, I know for me at least, and I can't speak for you or anyone else, but I suspect that I am not alone. The December 17th holiday often brings up a lot of feelings of loss and panic and isolation and mourning. And so we wanted
fear.
Fear, exactly. And so we wanted to release this episode as both a reminder to our respective communities that we are not alone. And I mean, I feel like I've been talking for a long time.
Yeah.
So
you were doing such a good job. I was just
great.
Gonna let you go with it.
Yeah, you know, I think it's just so important to hear from other folks that have been through this. Like, all of our stories are different, and also they are all the same.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited. We're going to do a joint episode that releases on both of our podcasts, sharing people's stories. And one of the things that I said when I announced this before, and I think it's also important, is that you don't have to feel like you have to record the story yourself. You could have a friend read your story because, you know, I mean, we were talking a little bit before we recorded this about the fact that often coming out stories are really fraught, especially with family, with parents, and I think that if you feel like even though you're an out sex worker, you don't necessarily want to talk about your family dynamics under your sex work name, that's totally fine. Or, you know, if you want to say who you are and tell your story and proclaim it, that's also cool. So we're taking stories in whatever audio form you would like to send them.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can send them in yourself. You can also, I want to say that I'm sure this is true for you, Jessie. I know it's true for me. I know a lot of old pro performers. So if you do not know somebody that you feel comfortable reading your words, you can write up your story, email it in, and we will find somebody to read your words aloud. So
that's a good
point.
Can
do this. You can send us written material. You can bug somebody in your life to do it, but we will take you and your stories as they are.
Yeah, and you can send those to me at Jessie@peepshowmedia.com.
Yes, send them to Jessie@peepshowmedia.com. You can send them to me, but I will just be forwarding them to Jessie@peepshowmedia.com, who is project managing.
Perfect. Where can people find you?
You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Old Pro Podcast. You can follow me at Kaytlin Bailey. And check out the show and all of its relevant links at theoldestprofessionpodcast.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Jessie. I'm really excited to work with you.
Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Peepshow Podcast. I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at PeepSage.
And I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or at jessiesage.com.
We would like to remind you that we have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/PeepShowPodcast. Our music is courtesy of Joe Kennedy. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage.
Signing off. Have a great week.